Thank you for joining us. The past week may have been one of the most chaotic yet in President Trump's administration. The Washington Post quoted an ally of the president who called the situation in the White House, quote, pure madness. On Wednesday, the president appeared to take up positions on gun control in direct contrast to many in his own party. Mr. Trump even went as far as accusing Republicans of fearing the NRA. After that, we saw the resignation of one of the president's closest advisors, White House Communications Director Hope Hicks. Hicks announced her departure one day after testifying on Capitol Hill in a Russian election meddling investigation. During her testimony, Hicks said that she sometimes tells white lies for the president. Then the president announced plans to tax steel and aluminum imports into the country, suggesting that a trade war would be beneficial. That proposal drew a mix of praise and criticism. The president's top economic advisor, Gary Cohn, reportedly threatened to resign over the plans. It's been reported that one of the main reasons Cohn has stayed in the White House was to prevent the president from imposing such tariffs. And an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal called the president's proposed tariffs the biggest policy blunder of his administration. The question of what is going on in the White House was a big topic on the Sunday morning talk shows. Here's how a number of the president's supporters and critics addressed it.
So this is going to happen this week for sure. The way he said it, 25%, 10%.
Whatever his final decision is what will happen.
Meaning this isn't a done deal.
I didn't say that. I just said what he has said, he has said. If he says something different, it'll be something different. I have no reason to think he's going to change.
What does this mean? You just said, well, he may say this and he may say that.
No, I didn't say that. I said he is the one who makes the decision.
Right. Look, I think that there is a reality about this White House. I've talked to some people who work in the White House about it, which is that you're not going to change the way President Trump operates. This is the way he is. And so I think it's a mistake to try to have a staff structure that is designed to change him. I think what you have to do is have a staff structure that works around the way he operates.
Having worked in and out of a White House for 8 years, if you have one of these things happening over the course of a couple of months, it creates a lot of chaos internally and externally, because it's hard to focus on the job that you're supposed to do, not just for the president, but for the senior staff. And now they're all speculating, will the national security advisor still be here or won't he? Will Gary Cohn stay here or won't he out over these tariffs?
I think what the staff has to do is, in fact, what Hope Hicks, I think, did. I think Hope Hicks saw that between the Rob Porter situation and some of the other things that were going on, that she was becoming a distraction for the president and less of an asset in her mind. And she did the noble thing, in my view, which was to say, you know what, if I'm not 100% an asset for the president, I'm gonna back away.
For more, let's bring in USA Today Washington Bureau Chief Susan Page. She's in Washington. Right, so Susan, we mentioned that Washington Post article off the top, which paints a chaotic picture of the West Wing. The piece includes a quote from a Trump ally calling the president's frustration pure madness. There have been other tumultuous weeks at the White House before. Is there something different here?
You know, Elaine, in fact, it's hard to remember a week at the White House since President Trump was inaugurated that was not tumultuous. I'm not sure what we'd point to as a quiet week in this White House. But I do think this past week, reached a new level of tumult and even chaos around both some big policy issues like tariffs and trade and gun control and school safety, and about the personnel the president has surrounded himself on the White House staff.
Well, the president said he plans to impose steel and aluminum tariffs in the coming week. On Friday, he tweeted that a trade war would be good for the economy. Does the president want a trade war? Why now?
Well, the president seems willing to engage in a trade war because, as his own advisors are telling him, that is what may well happen. And we are hearing, even from our allies like Great Britain and Canada, about the consequences of the tariffs that the president announced in almost an offhand way this week. Historically, of course, trade wars have not been good for the U.S. economy. And that's something that's meant that the president's looming decision on actually imposing these promised tariffs this coming week has divided even his own top staff. Even his national economic advisor is at odds with other advisors who are urging him to do this.
And what are the reactions that you've heard, Susan, to this particular policy decision?
You know, one of the things we've heard is a lot of concern from Republican members of Congress, because, of course, one of the pillars of the traditional Republican Party has been a belief in free trade and the American ability to compete, and in the desirability for our own economy to have as much free trade as possible. So Republicans in Congress have expressed concerns about this, and there is this little bit of hope that perhaps the president will change his mind or adjust the policy in some way before it is formally put in place.
Let's talk about gun control. The president seemed to briefly fly in the face of the NRA this past week and embrace comprehensive gun reform. After a meeting with NRA officials in the Oval Office Thursday, officials said they were back on the same page. How close to new gun safety legislation are we? Can we tell at this point?
You know, I think generally the safe bet is that no gun control legislation will pass. It hasn't passed in decades. Significant new gun legislation has not even in the aftermath of the Sandy Hook tragedy. So I think the safe bet is that nothing happens. The one thing that makes this maybe different is the activism of the students that we've seen in Florida and elsewhere on this issue. The big marches planned nationwide on March 24th. I think that is the one thing that could kind of shake up the paralysis that has surrounded gun policy in the United States for so long.
Well, the president has made several different statements on this issue, including that somewhat extraordinary meeting that allowed the cameras to remain in there for much of it, in which he essentially was seated next to a giggling Dianne Feinstein at one point. What has been, though, the reaction from lawmakers?
Well, so Democrats were delighted. At one point, Senator Feinstein actually punched the president on the arm. She was so thrilled with what he was saying. But Democrats also do not trust the president to follow through on this or to hold this view over the long haul when things get tough and you have to actually try to push something through Congress. Republicans were quite concerned. You could see that on their faces in that amazing meeting, how alarmed some of them were. So this is something I think the president, given his standing with his voters, he could potentially push through some gun legislation. But I think neither side is persuaded that he is actually going to do that.
All right. Susan Page in Washington for us. Susan, always great to have you. Thank you.